Hello, hello. People are joining. Welcome all. We'll give a few moments for the magic of virtual meetings to commence as we all get people entering the site. So just give a couple minutes and we'll get going. Thank you all for being here. .601, let's go maybe to 602 or 3. Does that make sense? And then kick it off. Everybody get your coffee mugs and your pretzels and snacks for this evening's meeting. Sorry, we don't provide them ourselves, but you can supply yourself. It's too bad we're not holding this meeting outdoors. It's a beautiful night. We'll have to open your windows. Watching the participants. All right, well, shall we get started? It's about 6:02 and a half. This is John Hamilton, the mayor of Bloomington, co-chair of the Bloomington Hospital Reuse Committee. My intrepid and indefatigable co-chair, Vice Simpson, is unfortunately not feeling well tonight. We send her all best wishes, but I'll carry on our behalf as co-chairs and then hand it over soon to the team that you most want to hear from. But let me just add thanks to all who are participating, the public. This being the third of the major public meetings that we're holding to help us look at this extraordinary and exciting opportunity for the city of the hospital site reuse. We are in the midst of a very extensive review and planning and discussion and envisioning with a lot of great partners to help try to identify and put together a master plan by the end of the year. This is the third of 4 major public meetings, so thanks again for all of you who are participating. And as you know, there's a steering committee composed of many people from the community, 3 dozen or so, that will also help oversee this process. And we thank all of them for participating, being here tonight, and our partners. I'll keep it brief. This is an incredible opportunity for the city. It's a chance for us to really dig into our values, think about the values that we cherish, that we honor, that we want to live, and how to put them into effect in this once in a century opportunity to rebuild and reimagine a big part of downtown Bloomington. What we do, how we plan, how we envision, how we embody those values will affect this city, this community, and the tens of thousands of people who will be living here for generations. So let's do it right. Let's listen. Let's think hard. Let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. And let me hand it over. I know Deputy Mayor Mick Renison, I think, is next. Thank you, Mick, for your extraordinary leadership and involvement in this. And we have a full team to get engaged tonight. And I'll sit back and again thank everyone for your participation in helping make Bloomington a better place. Thanks, Mick. Over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Hamilton, and wish that Vice Simpson could join us tonight, but she said she was going to watch the video afterwards, and so we'll know she'll get the feedback from tonight, as will all of you. If you wish to look back on other things, we'll point out numerous times tonight that bloomingtonhospitalsite.com is your resource for all archived information about our project, your project, and after tonight, that'll be updated again with additional information. So just to re-familiarize yourself with the project outline in yellow is the 24 acres that the city is purchasing from IU Health. And of course, IU Health is still actively using this site for their current hospital needs, for our community's hospital needs, and won't be moving until late in 2021. So we're well ahead of the game in master planning the future of this site after Bloomington Hospital moves over to their new site on the east side of our community. And then they'll have to obviously demolish some of the old assets. That will take some time after they relocate. But we may get some of the site turned over to us a little earlier than that. So it is important for us to continue this master planning process to prepare for some of the early site turnovers that might occur. You'll note on the yellow lines of the outlines of the purchasing area that we are acquiring, there are some little parcels that are notched out. And I think it's important for community residents to know we are actively pursuing filling in some of those little blocks of odd shaped parcels that are not currently in the ownership. And we'll continue to work towards that to give us more opportunity to redevelop the site overall. And also it's important to note that there's 76 acres in total of medically zoned property in this area. So while the city will control 24 acres, much of the rest of that 76 is being thought of in its future redevelopment, as it will no longer all be medical use, it'll be zoned something different. And know that that's going on through our Unified Development Ordinance updates and the mapping process, which will be in the first quarter of 2021. So all this times nicely with our project. I'd also like to point out sort of where we've been. So some of you that are on tonight's Zoom meeting may have been participants in all of our other previous forums, and we welcome you back. But if you're new, you may not know where we've come from. So I'm going to walk you through just a real quick timeline of what's happened to date. First, I want to point out that a master plan develops concepts and a framework for development. A master plan does not create an architecturally designed series of buildings that will ultimately be built on the site. So that's our goal. And with that in mind, the assistance of the Hospital Reuse Committee that has been involved in this project for more than 6 years, the city has to date this year, back in January, hired the design firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill to help us with the process. Since then, that group, along with their sub-consultants, have conducted stakeholder and small group interviews in May and early June. We conducted our first public forum on June 16th. There were 200 participants in that forum on Zoom. That particular forum asked participants what they would like to see on the site as it redevelops. So that was our starting point. The second public forum was held August 6th, over 100 in attendance at that forum. And that forum focused on economic conditions and early design options, reflecting on the feedback we received from Forum 1 and input from surveys that we conducted after Forum 1 was conducted. And now we are at Forum 3 tonight, where we will share the refined plan based on comments from those previous processes. This will also be, and it's important for this to be noted, the final opportunity to comment before the illustration phase begins. So we get away from concepts and some of the drawings you'll see tonight into more of an illustrative, sort of semi-final version of what the project and master plan will look like. So the future steps that are coming after tonight's meeting is our team SOM will refine those plans to reflect sort of the scale of the proposed redevelopment rather than the character. The character work is being done and concluding tonight, and then we'll move forward in Forum 4 with a presentation that will be shared at a public meeting, and we've identified the date for you, November 18th, and that will be more of a reveal rather than a tell us what you want phase. We're kind of wrapping it up and getting to the reveal phase. Ultimately, our goal is to have an adaptable, flexible master plan to guide the redevelopment of this site and allow for the unknowns of our world, which we've all been experiencing and are still experiencing right now with COVID-19. And also this plan has to react to market conditions over the course of a multi-year, multi-phased redevelopment of the site. So as we have in previous forums, we will post documents, comments, and answers to questions we received tonight on the project website. That's bloomingtonhospitalsite.com, all one word, bloomingtonhospitalsite.com. There's already a ton of information about the project for your review there, so you can look at it anytime you wish. Even after tonight, there'll be ways for you to comment on what you processed tonight throughout our 3 little subsets of workshops. I'll now turn it over to Rachel Momini from SOM, and she'll walk us through the next part of the presentation. Thanks again to all of you for your participation.
Hi all, thanks Nick. So here we're looking at a schedule for tonight's public forum. I know we're already running a few minutes behind, but I think that's okay, and we'll try to keep to this schedule as much as possible. But firstly, I'll bring you through some of the feedback that we received from our last public forum, as well as a survey that we put on following that. And then we'll start with a workshop 1, going over access and connections on site, kind of making sure that we're on the right track for establishing a good framework for this new development. Next, we'll focus on open space, looking at the character of those spaces and kind of what people's preference might be. And then lastly, we'll look at land use and neighborhood character. So getting a feel for some density and height on site, as well as other things. So these are each 25-minute workshops. And like I said, we'll try to keep to that. So firstly, I'll go through that community feedback that I was mentioning. So just a reminder, these are the principles that we went through during our last public forum. Generally, respondents agreed with these planning principles that we put forth back in August. Things like reconnecting the street grid, making public first complete streets, creating a flexible framework for development that's adaptable to future conditions, contributing to a network of public spaces that already exist in Bloomington, improving places like Building Trades Park and connecting to the B line with the new Greenway we're proposing. Designing with sustainability in mind, planning for a variety of different housing types at various levels of affordability from market rate to income restricted, creating a lively mix of uses that support downtown as well as the surrounding neighborhoods, as well as a new anchors and community amenities that complement existing assets and support the residents. And lastly, that idea of maintaining neighborhood scale at the edges, so making sure that we step down in height to the existing community around us. Next slide, Deb. So we have put together some of that feedback that we received during our breakout room sessions last public forum, and they generally all fall into these 8 categories. In terms of engagement, we heard people really wanted the material to be sent in advance because there's a lot to go through, and so we uploaded these materials this past Friday. Principles, again, people generally agreed on the principles apart from some of the planning jargon that we've been using. And so that's something that we're working on. A major theme and something that was of great importance to many of you was the notion of affordability, diversity, and inclusion on site, making sure that it's a truly mixed area in terms of income, ability, and ethnicity. Connectivity, people were very on board with the smaller scale blocks and grid of complete streets, making sure that it was pedestrian and bicycle oriented. And then in terms of public realm, the notion of prioritizing sustainability and making visible the stormwater management on site. In terms of scale and density, we heard that higher density on a portion of the site was accepted as long as we do step down that site to height to the surrounding neighborhoods. In terms of retail and amenities, again, we heard that people want these uses to really support and not detract from the existing downtown area, and that we should create more than just retail on the ground floor, but rather focus on community uses to activate the site. And then lastly, the core building. We heard people for saving it and people for okay with maybe finding another use for that site, but there is the potential reuse for the core building as housing or maybe as an arts and culture use. And there was also support for maybe using some of those historic elements on site if it were to be demolished. We heard from you the types of public spaces you would like to see on site. And if you want to click again, Doug. And these are the different options that people chose. And then on the next site, or on next slide, please. This is the sort of feedback that we heard from people. These were the 3 images that people preferred. They liked to see that intersection of housing, retail, and the natural green space. Again, the sort of visible sustainability on site. The notion of creating places that have different characters and are distinctive spaces for different uses, as well as a focus on the outdoor and the pedestrian in the environment while incorporating local business use, as well as the residential component. And then we heard back from you about which framework concept you preferred. And far and away, people chose the Greenway scheme. And if you want to go to the next slide. This was some of the feedback that we received on that particular framework. So people really liked the focus there on the stormwater management, the notion of a really continuous and connected free flowing public space, that strong pedestrian connection again to the beeline with the focus on pedestrians and cyclists, and really the notion of creating a recognizable public space. But some of the weaknesses that we heard back about this particular scheme was maybe that it detracted a little bit from the existing building trades park, and maybe we should really put some focus there in terms of creating a public space. Some people thought the space was maybe too large, so there was a concern for maintenance and crowding. People felt that some of the north-south connectivity could be strengthened, as well as the potential need for vehicular access through that east-west greenway that we're showing, as well as just the desire to enhance and humanize those existing streets around the development area. So we've really tried to incorporate all that we've heard thus far. And so we'll bring you again, like I mentioned before, through a series of 3 workshops where we'll show you that progress in our design thinking. And we've split it up into access and connections as the first, again, open space is the second, and lastly, land use and character. So the principles related to access and connections, again, the notion of reconnecting the street grid, making complete streets that really focus on the pedestrian, and again, creating a flexible framework that can adapt to future development and market needs. So for each section, we really want you to kind of focus on the questions that we're putting forward. We'll pause on key slides that have this little icon in the corner, and we'll pose a polling question. So we'll ask you to give your input on things like these questions we have in front of us. So here, asking you to look at the roadway alignment. Are we proposing the correct streets to go through the current development site? And then we'll also be going through a series of street designs to get your input on, do you think that we're proposing the correct solutions and design ideas for those streets? And so we will be using the polling feature here in Zoom, and so you'll be prompted to vote or give your input. And so for some of these questions, it's a yes, no, or not sure, and really that's just to basically spark discussion and to get some of your preliminary input for our designs moving further. And then we encourage you throughout this whole workshop or these series of workshops to give your input on the chat feature below. So any questions or comments that you might have, feel free to do it there. Okay, and now I'll hand it over to Doug.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I wish I was in Building Trades Park right now. We were very fortunate to have spent some time back in Bloomington over the last several weeks, and we're able to not only revisit the site, but understand the connections to both McDowell Gardens and Prospect Hill. And, you know, I think this point of framework really is how we look at the arrangement of streets and the connectivity that supports the movement, the vibrancy, but also the sense of welcome and inclusion just in the pattern of streets and blocks. And so we did a couple of diagrams based on what we had been hearing, but also what's really feasible, because as many of you know, there's some significant grading as you move further west in the site. This view is taken more or less from as you're approaching downtown, kind of in the northeast corner looking back. So you see the beeline in the front, the Kroger, the grocery store, and then the 24 acres. We removed the outline because we'll be showing a number of lines through our diagram. And at the end of the day, it's about the connectivity and the cohesiveness of all of these neighborhoods in building the sense of community. Go to the next slide. I should mention before we go through these, feel free to put questions forward, additional comments in the chat feature. So beyond just the polling, we'll hopefully be able within each of these work sessions to go back and sketch online with all of you to respond to many of your comments, but also to introduce other ideas that may come up through our discussion this evening. So one of the ideas that has come forward is the importance of 2nd Street, really is this active community corridor. And not only is it a wider street, but its connectivity well beyond the site, both to the west and east, is an important artery within the city. And in many ways also becomes an important address, as it not only passes by the majority of parcels on the hospital site, building Trades Park, but connects you right to sort of this commercial area with the grocery store and other uses along 2nd Street further to the east. So seeing that as an active community corridor. The second idea is to extend the fabric of neighborhood streets. So Roger Street and Morton Street exist, but the opportunity to bring Fairview Street through. So as you look, let me try this for a second here with the pen. I think this will work. As we extend Fairview Street through, it not only connects McDowell Gardens to building Trades Park, but creates potentially a great address for future development parcels on either side and along that street, including the area adjacent to the parking garage itself. We are very interested in also finding ways to extend Madison Street through. So we get this rhythm of north-south connections that allow a number of things. It allows us greater access into the site and to connect the neighborhoods from north to south, both for pedestrians as well as vehicles. And by doing so, it gives us ways to access parking that isn't necessarily along the primary streets, again, helping with ways and mechanisms to alleviate traffic congestion on some of the other major roadways. Clear that. Go to the next slide. And then, as Rachel had mentioned, one of the sort of key takeaways and a lot of interest from our last public forum was the introduction of this Greenway. But one of the comments that came along with the Greenway was the need for it to be public and to have public access. And as opposed to relying solely on 1st and 2nd Street to move east-west through the site, could we look at the inclusion of a smaller, very neighborhood-scaled street, really serving as a way to connect from Morton Street and the B line all the way up to Fairview Street. And again, walking back out on the site not that long ago, there are some grades between Roger Street and Fairview, but we think this is achievable once you look at the potential to have accessible roadways and to look at some slight regrading across the site. Perhaps this drawing then starts to show some initial thoughts on those elevations, but I also want to point out here in the lower right corner that these blocks, we talk about sort of walkable development, very pedestrian focused, you know, keeping these blocks to more or less 300 feet by 300 feet is keeping with the fabric of the blocks and the streets further to the north. And we think this really contributes to the character and sort of the porosity and the contextual nature of how just the urban framework will fit as a great sort of common ground between McDowell Gardens and Prospect Hill. I do want to mention this zone right through here is probably one of the steeper grades. If you're out there today, you'll see the hospital access road just a little bit to the north of that. But again, that's something we can achieve through the design of the streets. One of the challenges we did have was the connection here and the extension of Jackson Street. That change in elevation is too significant to create a roadway through there, but it also allows us to create greater connectivity to the parking garage. And so one of the decisions we made in this refined plan was to look at the connectivity of the grid, but perhaps there do it in a way through the development block, knowing some of the challenges just through the engineering of vehicular access. And so, Rachel, maybe this is a point where if everyone, I think down in the lower portion of their screen, has the opportunity to press the polling button. We'd love to get your input if you feel this is a framework that's headed in the right direction in terms of the frequency of streets, the sort of scale and development of the blocks, or if there's something else that you're not sure about, please put forward a question in the chat section. And before we go into the next series of slides about street design, perhaps Aaron can summarize some of the questions that are coming forward that we can talk about through this format.
Yeah, Doug, so one of the questions just came through the chat is a question of a little more clarification on the steep grades and it's just a little bit more about the kind of where the biggest grades are on site.
Sure. Well, that's a great comment, and I'll try to use the highlighter here, I guess. So right there, from Rogers Street up to the intersection with the future Jackson Street, extension of Jackson Street, that's a change of about 25 feet. And much of that, actually, I can close this polling window. I can see what I'm drawing. That can be achieved from a vehicular access, as well as, I think one of the benefits with this diagram of the open spaces itself is it allows us to sort of create longer distances so that we have walkable slopes up through the park space itself. The other grade, I don't know if that answered the question, but there is our biggest concern. The other grades, if I can just highlight them for a minute. Apologies. Here, let me keep the highlighter. Jackson Street, it's very subtle. It's 5 feet from First Street to the Greenway. A little further to the west, from First Street to the Greenway along Fairview, we're actually dropping 5 feet. So again, those are all very straightforward. This change in grade here on Fairview leading to Building Trades Park actually exists today. That's very close to the current drop-off and arrival for the hospital. And then really everything else is predominantly flat. There's a little variation here and here, but generally they're all achievable with 5% grades or less. Aaron, I don't know if that answered the question, but
yeah, I think that covers it. There was just some understanding about where the kind of biggest impacts were. There's another question coming in, about the blank blocks, and we'll be sharing later on in the presentation. We'll be sharing information about what fills the blocks, but for now, it's just focused on the scale of the blocks themselves.
That's correct. And honestly, getting the scale of the blocks correct. You know, we've tested these, and I think you'll see later on in the section on land use is that I'll just take my pen for a moment and take this block on the corner, and just looking at the scale of development.
Where are?
Right down there in the corner.
Where are you?
Can you see where I'm drawing? Right in the lower corner by Morton and 2nd Street.
Okay.
I'm outlining in red. Can you see that, ma'am?
Now we can, yes.
Okay. So just looking at the scale of that housing, or perhaps you can see just, I drew another bar, you know, multifamily housing. You can incorporate many of those buildings in multiple configurations within that block. That these blocks we've tested, they're big enough so that they each can have frontage, and by frontage we mean activation, along those important streets, perhaps even along parts of the Greenway, allowing us to deal with parking on the interior of the block. So we create an urban design solution that really promotes walkability, welcoming front doors, active street level that can accommodate a variety of uses, not just retail, but one of the things we'd like to talk about later are all the other uses and activities to support the community that could be integrated within any of these blocks. Aaron, are there any other questions?
Well, we've had the poll up for 5 minutes. I think I'm going to end that poll and share that. That's kind of interesting to see. Pretty strong results coming back with 72% about the correct alignment and 22% not sure, and only 7% or so saying no.
One of the things, maybe before we move on, just to share with everyone of sort of things we've looked at. We did look, for example, at Fairview Street, which comes in, if you can see where I'm drawing right now, just south of First Street with the red line. And let me close this window. Sorry, everyone. Okay, there. We did look at staggering it.
Take away the poll results, please. You're covered.
Got it.
Aaron, can
You
close
have to
that?
do it.
Oh, just click, ma'am, if you could click the upper left little button in the poll window, it'll close.
No, well,
Where it says close.
The other thing, ma'am, and for anyone else who's having trouble seeing some of the sketches, we're doing screenshots of all these and we'll share those with everyone with
Okay.
notes.
good.
What I was just mentioning is we did look at staggering the grid, more or less Fairview Street, creating a shift so that it could provide direct access to the parking garage. It's also a mechanism used to deter through traffic. But I think what we found at this point in our study, that wasn't really necessary, that the traffic on Fairview coming up to 2nd Street would not necessitate that. And more importantly, if I erase that for a moment and go back to what we have shown, which is just a continuation of Fairview, it actually avoids confusion and provides what, in our opinion, greater flexibility for the city and the community to look at the development of those blocks because they're more regular size.
Okay, good.
Let me clear. Aaron, how are we doing on time? Should we go into street design?
Yeah, I think we should move into the next section. We're at 5:33 here.
Okay. All right. So we're going to switch gears here for a second and talk more specifically about street design. Since we showed a number of new streets, we've also been very interested in improvements to existing streets. So we have a holistic view of that public realm within this right-of-way of streets and how to make that as cohesive and enjoyable and safe. And the term complete streets has been used in many of our meetings. Now, when we were out on site, we were able to take a number of photographs. And then what we'd like to do is show you a series of recommendations that we've put forward for the city to consider related to making these streets, like here on 2nd, this is looking east. You can see the parking garage to the right.
Right.
To make them safe for people, but to also make sure they move the right amount of traffic through and don't create congestion. So there are some challenges with 2nd. It is faster moving traffic. There are multiple turn lanes, and the experience for pedestrians, at sometimes the sidewalks are very narrow and just not as welcoming. And of course, how do cyclists traverse along the street as they head towards downtown? So this, what we call a street section, begins to look at the current organization of the street. I'm looking in the same direction east that the photograph just showed us. So you see Building Trades Park on the left. There's then a sidewalk and a planting zone. And then there's travel lane, turn lane, and another what is exceptionally wide travel lane. And then a very small sidewalk, and then this undeveloped green space. Or frankly, an undeveloped setback. It's not really used as green space today. And one of the things we were considering within that public right-of-way, how could we incorporate on-street parking? How could we incorporate a dedicated two-way bike path? Reduce the amount of pavement from curb to curb so it's a safer distance for pedestrians to cross, and that we would look at crosswalks, perhaps even raised crosswalks to encourage that movement, especially when you're coming from the south into Building Trades Park, but also looking at widening the sidewalks. So this is primarily on the right side of this drawing, looking at adding a sidewalk, so actually holding the development back so that we can create a very welcoming and enjoyable pedestrian path along the south side of 2nd Street between the trees and what could be future development in front of that parking garage. So, Rachel, I don't know if this is also a polling question, but I think the question was, is this generally in the right spirit of how you would see 2nd Street? And if not, please share comments on the chat of other things you think should be incorporated or that we should look at related to the design of 2nd Street. Should I just keep going so we can come back to any of these?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can take it off mute. There's nothing that says we have to be limited by chat. It's just with 60, 70 people now, we just have to manage it. So we were also very interested in Rogers Street. Rogers Street is a pretty important north-south connection that's already there. Again, it is wider, but you can see the narrowness of the sidewalks. And again, if bicycles, there's no way for bicycles to traverse north-south through this portion of the site. So if I click again, I'm looking north. So we took that. This is the typical section, an 8-foot sidewalk, the 2 travel lanes, and then parallel on-street parking, narrower sidewalk, and then the planting behind that on the right. And the idea here, again, was to look at a larger setback on the property. So this would be on the west side. If I go back, just so I can flip through, you can see it pushes to the west because I'm looking north. To increase the width of the sidewalk and to introduce a planting strip. There is some slight regrading, but this again, this side of the street is fully controlled or would be part of the transfer of the land. And I think gives us the greater opportunity to incorporate that increased sidewalk. But as you can see here, we've also been able to incorporate bike lanes within the curbs. So that's on Rogers Street.
There, I got a poll to launch there. I'll leave it up. I'll leave it up for a minute, and then we can move on.
Okay. Okay. Can I move on? Can I move on?
I think you can move on. Yes.
Okay. So then First Street, and you know, First Street does not have sidewalks on the north side of the street. There is the retaining wall. This is, again, looking east right by the core building. So Rogers Street is the cross street in the distance. Similar concerns. Again, looking at that in a more diagrammatic section with no sidewalk and only a 5-foot sidewalk on the south side. Could we, again, impose a larger setback on the north side of the street so we can incorporate a sidewalk, probably rebuild the retaining wall to address the grade change, and find room to add landscaping. So we improve really not only the quality, but the pedestrian nature by adding trees, adding sidewalks on both sides for First Street. I think Aaron will also open a poll for First Street. Is that right, Aaron?
That's right. Launching it now. While we have that open, Doug, I think there's some questions coming in about sharrows and protected bike lanes and kind of how we want to incorporate each of those infrastructural elements into the various parts of the plan, with a lot of support here for protected bike lanes where appropriate.
Right. So, Aaron, maybe if I can go back and just summarize, because I probably went over that too quickly. So here, going back to Second Street. So this is dedicated off-street. So there's no interaction at all with the vehicle, and it's two-way. So you see this in a lot of areas where there's a high volume of, I'd say more than just recreational bicycle, but maybe commuter path. People biking to school or to work or to shop. And given the nature of Second Street as that important east-west connector, we thought this was really important to incorporate within the design of Second Street. And perhaps it can also extend much further to the east and to the west as this important bicycle route through the city. On Rogers Street, we actually incorporated it as dedicated within the curbs, within the street design. So here, for safety reasons, we split them on either side. Now, we'll have to work with the city and with the city's Department of Transportation to make sure that this is the right solution. You could also look at them two-way just on one side, but usually going with the flow of traffic on either side, again, in a dedicated lane should suffice. On First Street, because it is a narrower street, and one of the other considerations is we don't have the ability to impact private land residents' properties further to the east and the west. And so here the strategy was work within the right-of-way and try to get as much as we can, and perhaps by putting a setback on the hospital site, we could look at integrating bicycles, what we call a shared travel lane. Someone mentioned sharrows. You do see a lot of these in neighborhood streets. Again, I think we'll have to work with the city on sort of the safety and the success of these elsewhere in Bloomington. And if there is a need on First Street, because First Street ends a little bit further to the west. It doesn't continue all the way through. Whether or not
That's true.
that would require a dedicated lane on First Street or not.
Stops at Walker.
At Walker. And
On the west.
the beauty of all of this commitment to bicycles is they all tie into the B line. So once you get to the B line, it opens up a whole nother route of travel through the city. And then we did include one more slide as relates to streets, because we were suggesting to extend Fairview. Many of you perhaps are aware, between Wiley and First Street, Fairview is one-way southbound, and it's not that wide. So as part of the redevelopment, we would widen Fairview and then extend that all the way up to Second Street in something like what you're seeing illustrated here, with the on-street parking, which is great for visitors and guests, for all the residents that will be living in this new community, as well as any of the retail or community uses. And again, the incorporation of the sharrows, again, because these aren't necessarily primary streets, but really secondary neighborhood streets that move north-south through the neighborhood. So I think Unless there's any questions, Aaron, you were maybe going to summarize some of the comments or just on this section of streets and access. And maybe we can answer any remaining questions that we haven't already.
Yeah, let me,
Do I have to hit, I'll hit stop share. How's that?
I can do it here.
I did it.
All right. So these were some of the key questions that came up during the, can everyone see my screen? Yeah. So here's some key questions that came up. There was a comment about Maple Street and Euclid Street looking to be offset in the counterpoints of 2nd Street, and that Fairview wouldn't go through Building Trades Park, so it doesn't seem like there are particularly strong connections on the northwestern end of the site. So yes, there are some challenges where there's some roads that don't go completely through, but we're looking to kind of fold in the grid wherever we can. Maybe there's a little bit more discussion to be had about that. Sorry, I'm getting chats here too. I think there was a good comment here talking about using the advantages of grade as Bloomington is a hilly place. So thinking of the grade as an opportunity, good for exercise and waterfalling and sledding. We can talk a little bit more about that in the next section on open space. I think you'll find that to be very intriguing. And then there was a comment that was about the new Greenway not connecting to Maple Street. I think maybe that was just maybe something that we should emphasize more in our next iteration of drawings, but the Greenway is intended to connect through to Maple Street. And then finally, or not finally, but one of the comments that raised a lot of back and forth on the chat was about raised crosswalks on 2nd. This was clarified, I think, already by Nick, that a lot of this work's going to have to get further investigated by engineers. These are just concepts now to talk through about kind of what the potential could be in the future. But that all of these issues would be looked at from a traffic standpoint to make sure that you're finding the correct balance of pedestrian safety and free-flowing traffic.
So, Aaron, if I could just comment, because I've seen one or two of the chats, and I don't think you've had time to put them up on the questions here.
Sure.
The first was, we're referencing 12-foot vehicle lanes. And there's a comment that those are really too wide, and we agree. I think we'd like to work with the city on, finding the right dimension for lanes. And a lot of projects we're currently involved, we're definitely at 11 feet, and in many instances, even trying to get below that to slow traffic down and to prioritize safety for pedestrians. I do think for the, excuse me, and another comment of sort of mid-block alleys, smaller, maybe 10-foot wide mid-block alleys. A lot of times those are really great at taking traffic off of the streets and then providing more direct access to dedicated parking without impacting those city streets. I think that's something we should explore in how these parcels are put forward in the future development, so that there is some flexibility given the potential use, but the encouragement of alleys or internal circulation within each block to help mitigate some of the traffic concerns is a great suggestion.
Perfect. Now, I think we are going to need to move on to the next section here in order to get all of the workshops in. So I'm going to stop sharing.
And then I'll share, if I may. And I think at this point, we may not take a break. We'll just keep going if everyone's okay with that. So Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Yeah, so now we're gonna go over the open space for this area. So we're focusing on the creation of dedicated landscapes and plazas to help stitch the public realm together to create this great pedestrian experience that we're talking about. So revisiting the planning principles here, relating to open space. We really want to see a new series of spaces that can contribute to the existing network of public spaces that Bloomington already has to offer. So we mentioned the Building Trades Park, as well as Beeline and beyond to Switchyard Park, et cetera. As well as in this space, showing off a new standard of sustainability for Bloomington in showcasing stormwater management and other things like that. So if you want to go to the next slide. So as we did before, we'll sort of pause throughout the slides and kind of focus on some key questions. So here we'd like to get your input on the design of the Greenway, so that east-west connection that we're proposing coming through the development site. We've since, based on feedback, added vehicular connectivity through the site along the Greenway. And so we really want your input on, what does that street really look like? How does it function? As well as your preference for open space design. So things that are more lush and wetland focused, or things that are more plaza focused. And again, these are just to sort of spark discussion, really get your feedback on how we should move forward. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chris Merritt from Merritt Landscape.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And hello again, everyone. It's really nice to see some of the feedback coming in on the chat. I hope, I think, in this section, we'll be able to continue some of those conversations, particularly around the Greenway itself and the public space framework that we've started to develop and refine based on your feedback within that first section, this kind of streets and block structure that Doug and Rachel just presented. But before we dive into the plan, I'm just going to kind of walk you through how we got to where we're at now. So part of it starts with looking at some of the existing assets around us, including Building Trades Park. Even the small open space in front of the Hunter's School has great existing mature tree canopy, similar to the open space in front of the core building that we imagine we could renew through this effort, in addition to, on the east side, broadening the Beeline Gateway. Again, layering in the street network is critical to how we think about connectivity and access to open space. I'll point your attention to the east-west Greenway here as you start to see all the north-south streets turn from solid lines to dashed lines. And that's our way of trying to understand how the street could go from vehicular space to pedestrian space. And when you transition through that zone, you're feeling like you're crossing this east-west Greenway that really prioritizes pedestrian space. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by that.
Oh, I see.
So within that east-west Greenway, then we're starting to imagine this framework of a gradient moving from west to east of plaza and garden spaces. The plaza spaces would be prioritized around mid-block crossings, at intersections and active building edges. They're more open for flexible programming, a little more urban, and might have more iconic water features or seating elements, whereas the garden spaces bring you through the block and it's much more lush, brings some of the stormwater management through planting and the collection of water within the heart of the development. You can also see we've located one of these yellow plaza spaces at the terminus of Fairview and Second at Building Trades Park, as was mentioned in the first section, as a way to get from the development to Building Trades Park and into the development as well. And you can see with the core open space, also trying to connect diagonally so that you could move from Rogers and First Street through the core landscape into the Greenway. And then on the east side, also a new plaza that would broaden that Beeline Gateway that currently exists right at the corner of the Kroger there.
Right. That'd be good.
Into the development site. In addition to that, there would be a series of courtyards within each development parcel that would help connect residents to the Greenway and out to the streets as well. And a key feature of this Greenway is the opportunity to think sustainably about a holistic stormwater management strategy. So capturing, cleaning, and allowing for water infiltration, while also at the same moment potentially celebrating water and making it visible on site. So again, here's the framework, and I think we have an enlargement of this that I can speak to just so
There
it's
you go.
So starting at 2nd Street in Fairview along Building Trades Park, again, Doug has it as his background there. We really, when we were there, saw this, the park as a real asset, an incredible opportunity for the community in this development. We do think, though, the edge along 2nd Street could be enhanced as a way to connect into the development. So part of that is an improved intersection at Fairview that could bring you across, potentially into even a new gateway or plaza there. And then rethinking that retaining wall edge along 2nd to make it a little wider and perhaps even accommodate new seating at that park edge. And then if you come down Fairview to the east-west Greenway, you can start to see some of the design we've included at the intersection. So this would be places where cars could still move through, but they may be raised intersections, and paving goes from building edge to building edge and really allows pedestrians to feel like they can move freely across. The blue that you see there is potentially these water features that are at key places within the plazas. And then within these garden spaces, a more linear, smaller scale wetland could stitch all of this together. And then you can see the kind of green representing these garden spaces, potentially open lawns, maybe small woodland areas that could bring the kind of garden quality to life. And as was kind of outlined in that framework plan, you can see the larger area at the B line where we imagine that gateway could really open up with the development. And then again, that connection to the core landscape from First and Rogers into the Greenway. So just a few slides of character imagery to show you what we're thinking about here before we then go into the polling questions. Again, thinking about the street design, and this is really to focus mainly on that east-west Greenway street. So the two left images are showing a street that's potentially flush, has no curbs, and is a shared street. So pedestrians, you could close it at certain times and allow for different kinds of programming and festivals and events to happen, but could still function for everyday use. And then the streets on the right are a little bit more traditional, where uses are separated and the street has curbs. The plaza spaces, again, these are maybe a little more open, these are really your kind of social connectivity hubs and anchors within the development, where programming can happen and you can come together as a community and allow for different kinds of events to happen here. In the garden spaces that then stitch it all together, a little more intimate, smaller scaled, a lot more lush planting, but still allowing people to kind of live outside and experience passive and perhaps active recreation, with connectivity still being the key feature of all of this. So moving through that east-west Greenway. And then again, the courtyards that are perhaps interior to the development, places for that community to come together. There may be active programming there. Again, on the bottom right, this was an image that was voted favorably for its recreation, kind of passive enjoyment of small park space, and perhaps even an opportunity to grow your own food.
Gardens.
And then this notion of the water feature. So in the top middle image, that was one that was, I think, ranked the highest through the public engagement process. And this is similar to how we're imagining that linear wetland garden. But at plaza spaces, perhaps it becomes more like an urban water feature, where you're still using perhaps reclaimed limestone from the hospital as a way to celebrate both limestone and water as a real opportunity to mark the identity of this development and Bloomington. Just an existing view from when we were there of the location of this greenway. So in the left image, this is a view standing right next to Rogers Street looking east. So this is right where the greenway would be coming through the site. There's even an opportunity here where we could perhaps save some of these existing mature trees, which is important on a site like this where there aren't many. And on the right, you can start to see that grade change. Again, this is about the steepest part of where that grade change happens within the garage on the right. And the greenway would be coming straight through roughly where this hospital drive is today. So this grade change is, through this area is about 4 to 6 or 7%. And so, as was mentioned earlier, one of the real opportunities for making this greenway wider is to make it accessible. And by lengthening the path you travel there, it lessens the grade change. So we have a few views of just a kind of typical condition along this greenway. So this is again a kind of standard street section that we've started to develop, looking along the east-west greenway right where Jackson Street comes in. And so within the street itself, you're seeing a curbed street with separated uses, travel lanes in either direction, parallel parking on the north side, and then an off-street dedicated two-way bike path also to the north. And then the pedestrian space on either side is reflecting this idea of a wetland garden. So more kind of lush garden space, and on the right you actually see this meandering linear water feature that moves through the site. A second option for this same view, again, along the greenway with Jackson Street intersecting there, is the idea of a flush shared curbless street. So you can start to see along the street, the sidewalks and the street are at the same elevation. And that rather than having a dedicated bike lane, the bikes through sharrows again are sharing the street. And then this is perhaps an opportunity where you could think more about an urban plaza. So from building edge to building edge, it feels like one continuous open space that pedestrians can feel free to kind of move across the street. Just further down the greenway, this is a view, again, looking east where the Greenway and Rogers intersect. So again, this is kind of showing option A where we're showing a curbed street. So 2 travel lanes either way with parallel parking on the north. You can then see the curbs and an off-street dedicated bike lane. And again, this idea of this wetland garden on either side that brings pedestrians through. And then in the second option, again, this notion of a street with no curbs, flush and shared street uses. So the bikes are in sharrows with the cars. And then, at an intersection like this, perhaps it develops into more of an urban plaza where you have other splash pad-like water features, tree groves and paving, and seating opportunities for the community to come together. And so this is just an example of a kind of typical condition of what a curbed and separated street could look like. So cars out in the street behind the curb, a buffer, the dedicated bike lane, and then dedicated pedestrian space, all within its own space. And then again, this idea of the flush shared street. So you do have this as an example at the Trades District where there's a seamless transition from sidewalk to street. and it functions for everyday use and vehicular and pedestrian space, but you could also have the opportunity to close this down for different kinds of programming. So for the first Zoom poll here, what we'd like to get a sense of is your preference for the street design within the Greenway itself. So on the left, you may have to move the poll kind of to the side of your screen so you can still see it. But to the left, you can see the examples of the curbed and separated street. And then on the right, the idea of a flush or shared street. And then there's an option if you're not sure as well. Any questions to address from the chat there?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of lively conversation here about the presence of vehicles through the Greenway and talking about whether or not there should be vehicles at all, or vehicles should be a more limited part of the Greenway experience.
Yeah, it's a important question to get right here. And I think we do imagine this Greenway space as kind of local access only. So you'll note that it doesn't connect anywhere through it. It kind of dead ends at the B line and on the western portion of the site. So you would really only be traveling here for specific local access.
I think too, though, Chris, if I can just jump in, why I went back to this drawing is the way you've shown it here, it could also be removed from the scheme, and that the design of the Greenway itself could be tightened up. You know, I think this is a really important point. As you mentioned, it's important to get this right. And perhaps this topic alone requires further study that we'll need to talk with both the engineers, but also do further assessment on really the functionality of this space. What is it like when cars aren't there or when people aren't there? Does it have that sense of civic and green and all of those things we were describing earlier?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm not, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
I just wonder, I was sitting here thinking that like where the water feature is, it's awful close to the park where there's a lot of residents that stay there. And is this going to be an attraction? Is that something we need to address? You know, the people that are in the park a lot.
You mean the park further to the east?
Yeah.
Centennial Park, or I forget the name. Sorry.
Yeah, down there by.
Seminary Park.
Seminary, excuse me.
Yeah, Seminary Park. That's right along there, isn't it? Right.
Yeah, I just colored it in green on the far right.
Yeah. Okay, so it's another block away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's you know, it's a little further away, but I think, you know, generally, you know, our
I was
approach-
thinking it was closer, and I thought that would be such an attraction to have all those nice, you know, places. And I didn't know if that was gonna, you know, do we need to make, you know, be prepared for that, or. I'm not trying to single any group out, but it is something to think about, you know.
Mhm.
I was thinking it was closer.
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think we, you know, would intend to design these spaces so that, you know, it is welcoming to everyone, and that
Right.
actually everyone would be attracted to these spaces, and that, you know, through that kind of social interaction and kind of vibrancy within the public realm, you know, I think it will ultimately create the kind of public space we're trying to create for a development like this.
Maybe it might even provide things for some people to do to help with taking care. You know, if there's a garden or if there are things there.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, we know that, you know, access to open space and nature, I think there's, you know, a lot of research out there about the impact on mental health and wellness, and the kind of open space we're trying to create. In addition to this still being a district that promotes health as part of its identity. I think the next section here is about the design of the open space within that east-west greenway. So more specifically, this idea about a linear wetland garden and these water features and the management of stormwater, like these images. So in the top middle image again, something that feels a little more natural, meandering in the garden spaces perhaps, where then it terminates at a more urban water feature. And then the next option is this idea of the urban plaza. Again, something that could be used for community programming. If the street was closed, you could be out in the street. And it's also a place where ground floor uses and building edges could kind of spill out into the public space. So the Zoom poll here is your preference for that open space design. On the left, again, this wetland garden idea. So you're seeing an image of that, and also on the bottom left, a perspective image of that from eye level within that greenway. And then on the right, what that could look like in a more urban plaza condition. We've asked in the Zoom poll your preference for either of those, but also a combination of the two, recognizing that these don't necessarily have to be, you know, exclusive of each other. And in fact, perhaps the most interesting urban public space here is a way to figure out a kind of hybrid of both of them.
We're about a minute into polling here. I've got about 15 more seconds. I'll leave this poll open here.
And I think, Aaron, this is the end of this section. And so it would be good to recap, because there's been a lot of chat. I haven't been able to follow all of them, but I think it would be good for two reasons. One is, you know, within this framework plan that Mick had mentioned early, and we also highlighted in that last workshop, it's important to understand the sort of scale and frequency of movement, and those that also include open space, not just for cars, but more importantly for people. The second is, although these are great illustrations and images of what's possible, the design of the park would be an entirely separate process down the road. These are really, I think, to help Chris and us understand, do we have the right scale of space to accommodate these different programs, character, and function? But the actual design would involve all of you in the future, when that actually becomes a specific project to design the park itself.
Okay.
So Aaron, I'll stop sharing. Do you have a recap of some of the things we had heard?
Yeah, I think some of the here. Let me share here. So plenty of comments back and forth on cars in the Greenway, some in support of, some not. So I think looking at the kind of overall amount of roadway that is within the Greenway is something that we'll certainly be looking at. And a parallel to that would be, there were some good comments here about in support of some hardscape, in that it is more supportive of accessibility for people with limited mobility and a more urban environment. And then also some discussions here about the idea about bike and ped priority, and a little back and forth here about what is necessary on that right of way that goes through. So I think we'll have a lot of work to do between now and the next session to kind of talk through the scaling of the different elements of the Greenway. Another question too was talking, which is just a question, was asking about water features and if they have to flow east-west.
And the answer to that is the fall of the land, the topography of the land actually suggests that water will be moving in many directions, but water in the middle of the site, we have the ability to capture and move east-west, but we also have the ability within each of the blocks to capture it and have it move out to the north-south streets and then move north-south. So the idea of a stormwater overlay definitely needs more work and engineering behind it, but the concept of integrating that within this public realm of parks and streets seems to be a strong desire from everyone so far.
Then with that, I think we do need to move into, unless there's another final comments or two from folks, we think we need to move into the final workshop here.
Yeah, I think we should move forward. And just a reminder, we will be posting these questions and comments for further feedback on the Bloomington Hospital Redevelopment site website. So there'll be another opportunity to engage with these slides. So the last workshop that we're going to go through is land use and neighborhood character. So we're going to actually start to look at the idea of program on site and the different types of uses. So here, looking at a variety of different housing types, different typologies, again, this idea of different levels of affordability, lively mix of uses. So thinking about different community facing programs, what those look like on the site. The idea of bringing in new anchors to the site to attract people and to really strengthen the connection between the neighborhoods. Again, integrating community amenities, and then also this notion of neighborhood scale. So making sure that the height and the density really blends into the surrounding neighborhoods. Next slide. So similarly as before, we'll have some polling questions throughout the next series of slides. And we'll want you to be thinking about the different uses on site and their location. So we're going to bring you through a series of slides that show the existing assets on site and then what we're proposing. And so we'll ask your input on the density that we're showing. Is it too great, too small, just right? And also the height of the development being shown. Is it too tall? Could it be taller, or is it just right? So again, this is another discussion that we want to have with you all. All right, and then I'll hand it back to Doug.
So this was an earlier diagram we shared about the street network of streets, and Chris just talked about the Greenway in the middle. The one thing that I wanted to add to this was how we talk about kind of activation and why we've focused on smaller blocks and why we've focused on inclusion of open space, is that we have the ability to really define, if you can see here in red, what type of uses and activities we want to see along 2nd Street. We have the ability to start to discuss what kind of uses should front the B line, how the ground floor, and in the past meetings where we've had this conversation, we've talked about where's the right location for retail or for other community uses. But what the framework allows us to do is identify how we want to face and activate those streets. And some may maybe more retail or community uses on the ground floor with housing above. Others may just be housing. And so when we go through these series of diagrams, we're really getting to ideas about land use, which ultimately the city has the ability to look at how this land is zoned. Again, we'll be showing massing, what appear to be computer models, but they're not architecture. It's really to show how different uses can frame and enhance the character of this public realm of streets and parks, and meet the needs for housing and other uses identified by all of you and by other studies. So one of the things we wanted to emphasize is that there's a lot in and around the site that we should leverage and connect to. So we talked about Hunter School, clearly a 500-car parking garage, Building Trades Park. Rachel had mentioned a lot of the comments about potentially repurposing the core building, but also, you know, some of the commercial uses further to the east on the other side of the beeline. And, you know, these are already there, and this framework that we've shown really shows how to link and connect those in a very efficient way, and maybe a very interesting way with the Greenway. But the other thing that we thought was interesting from the first two public forums was this great interest on other uses that could help anchor, activate the term, how do we create a destination that is complementary to downtown, but that is a way to bring a focus to this part of the city. And so there were some ideas about, for example, the beeline, maybe there's a plaza and some cool uses that build off the synergy at the east end, right at the lower end of this diagram. Perhaps around the core building, maybe the core building is housing, maybe it's other community uses, but at the north end where that little pink box is, you know, is maybe another, right here, is maybe another community use. Daycare has come up. And clearly with daycare, there's, you know, the importance of access to open space. What was interesting to us is right here at the corner of Rogers and 2nd Street, adjacent to a very large parking garage, if you were to have retail, whether it's a grocer or something else that is complementary and meets the needs of the community, that's a pretty large and very, frankly, important corner or crossroads between Rogers and 2nd Street.
Right.
And then further to the west, I'll put another check mark here, the potential for maybe arts and culture right across from Building Trades Park. I don't know if that's performing arts, but with Hunter School and kind of anchoring the west end of the Greenway, we thought it was really interesting. And there's some, if I clear this for a second, go back to here. There's some really cool ideas and things I'm sure you've seen in your own community, but we could learn from other communities that have brought those functions as a way to anchor and create a sense of place. Now, the question, one of the questions we have as a polling question is, you know, I think, are these the right locations, you know, building off of the park and kind of these major intersections? But also, you know, maybe in the chat, you could give us your comments as, are there too many? Are there other sites we should look at that you think would be more desirable? Or are there some that we shouldn't consider?
Certainly seeing a lot of some, not all responses here. It's over 52, 55% of the respondents. So maybe we talk a little bit about where, if there's folks out there that have other locations or comments about the locations of these sites.
And or which ones would be better used for another function. Now, again, one part of the question is just the sites. The second is, you know, I think the uses can continue to evolve in terms of the highest and best use of some of these parcels on the ground floor. It was interesting, if I can draw while people are filling out the survey or adding additional comments that Aaron, maybe you can summarize in a moment. The relationship of this arts building, where I'll draw a big A, and its relationship to Building Trades Park. One of the things we didn't mention before, but right here, where Fairview and 2nd Street, that is the one spot where all of the grades match, and you can walk right across into Building Trades Park. So we want to build off of that sort of important connection from north to south. And now, granted, that could be on the south side of Fairview up against the parking garage. But we also thought there may be future synergies with Hunter School by having those two somewhat close to one another. And Hunter School, as you all know, is just to the west of that.
We're also getting a lot of feedback about concern for the size or the purpose of the destination retail that we're showing there, and how it maybe is not so much a desired use. But I guess we want to show the ability for a use like that, say your Urban Target or a similar type store, to be able to be located on site if that's something a developer is interested in. So we're kind of testing areas of the site as well to make sure that those can work if that's something that's seen as desired in the future.
Yeah.
It could be several, it could be not just one big thing, several different retail
Oh,
things.
completely.
So like coffee shop or
Yeah, and in our next slide, actually,
Local
you'll see
places.
those uses spread throughout the site as well. So we're kind of incrementally building them up here, but this just shows the ability for a larger tenant that they could fit here if that's what development in the future sees.
Yeah, I guess one of the things is we've talked, and sort of just as we've engaged with the community on a lot of the aspirations about uses and activities and community functions, you know, our economist has also been reaching out to understand kind of from the development, from the market, how we look at retail, because I think we want to enhance and strengthen downtown, right?
Mhm.
This has to be complementary. So it's finding the right balance and really understanding how retail would work within more of this neighborhood setting. But again, you know, synergies between, let's say, a cultural building and some sort of retail component around a parking garage that's already existing suggests you don't have to build all of that parking for what are more, I'll say, external or broader uses. But just different dynamics we have to consider.
and that's good with the arts and culture there in case there's events. You've got your parking too.
Right.
Now, we're not, you know, back to that earlier diagram, and I'll draw here in kind of red. You know, I think the ground floor of all of these buildings could also have retail, dry cleaners, you know, other amenities. Rogers Street is interesting because a little bit further south of First Street, it's actually right over this photo, if you guys can see where I'm drawing, there's another little pocket of commercial activity. And then there's some commercial activity on the north side of 2nd Street, right there.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
So that's why we focus at that intersection, but the scale and the footprint, you know, again, we're not predicating that it has to be that size, but that may just be a strategic site to explore those kind of uses in the future. So maybe with that, we want to get into the next set of conversations, which are all these all these other uses. I laugh because there's so much potential in a street grid like this to look at cool things at the corners. I mean, clearly we'll have to have residential lobbies and other things, but daycare, preschool, childcare, these are things we've heard in our past meetings with all of you. Community clinics, since this once was a hospital, fitness and wellness, makerspace, workshop, job training, cafe, restaurant, you know, but working with whoever develops these sites in the future that if let's say you develop here, I'm drawing right at the B line and 2nd Street. If this site is developed, it's very important that there's some active uses on that ground floor facing the B line because of its prominence and its importance, and the community would really benefit and value those uses. But that perhaps the rest of the block, I'll draw in blue just for illustration, maybe the rest of the block is more about just housing, and it's not as critical to have retail on all 4 sides on the ground floor.
True. Yep.
So I guess this is starting to illustrate many of the things that could happen beyond just retail, which is so important to the vibrancy of communities. And one of the things we'd like to know, and I think, Rachel, I know this is a yes or no, but frankly in the chat, if there's other uses you think should be included as part of this neighborhood of the redevelopment of the hospital site, please just send them along in the chat and we'll summarize all of those at the end. All right. How are we doing?
Yeah, moving right along here.
Are you suggesting I keep going, Aaron?
Yeah, I think we go to the next question or next presentation while people fill in the filter.
So the reason we started there is I think we heard both from our past 2 forums, but also conversations with the city that one of the critical needs and well into the future is to look at housing and how we look at housing between these 2 predominantly residential communities. The study that was done earlier this year by our economist, S.B. Friedman, projected almost 2,600 additional units would be necessary to support the projected population growth in Bloomington. Now, based on their understanding of the market and to kind of meet that projected growth, because there are other sites within Bloomington, this site alone could provide anywhere from 660 to almost 1,000 units. And I think it was important, it was recognizing that upper threshold of 1,000 units, maybe even more, but as a way to also expand choice, to address affordability within the community, but also, again, I think just greater diversity of housing choices for residents to really create that kind of cohesive and inclusive community, a place for everyone. And so what you start to see here is in the different colorations of housing, what could be more multi-family in the darker purple. Again, these are 4 floors over retail, I think is generally what we're showing. As you move closer to the Greenway, you start to see a lighter purple. Again, those could be duplexes or other, but smaller scaled multifamily. We talked about the core building potentially helping to provide some housing options. And then as you start to move towards First Street and McDowell Gardens, you see the transition to townhomes or even single family. And I think what's really kind of exciting is that given the scale of these blocks, you can continue to mix and match what's appropriate, but honestly, sort of the scale of 2nd Street as this prominent east-west roadway with everything we've talked about earlier could support slightly higher density. But as you move south and as you really look at Wiley Street is such a special little well-scaled street. I think you want to transition to lower scale residential further to the south.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just explain this, and we'll come back to this because we have some other views. This won't be the last time we see this. So this is what those colors were starting to represent in terms of the variety of housing types that could be provided within this framework. So from mid-rise apartments to lower rise to then fourplex. And there's on the bottom here, you can see examples that perhaps you're familiar with, but they also speak to the scale. And when we talk about density, DU/AC is dwelling units per acre. And so that's one way to speak of residential population within a footprint or within a block. So we can go from more dense to less dense and really tailor that appropriately and to test different scenarios. So if I could just walk through a couple of views, because I do think this gets to scale and character and the right density to animate and activate the space, but also address these other aspirations related to increased housing, 700 to 1,000 units in what's shown here in this plan. The capacity for upwards of maybe up to 200,000 square feet of other program in the ground floor. So whether that's community, retail, convenience retail, arts, and other things that have come out through tonight's conversation, there's a lot of space there that would be distributed along the ground floors facing many of the streets, potentially even at key moments along the Greenway. So this is just zooming in. I took that same view and I zoomed in. You can see the Centerstone existing building that's there. This is Rogers Street going in the foreground. And then you can see the transition in scale. And again, these aren't necessarily architecture just yet, but representative of the scale of buildings to accommodate those different residential densities and housing types. So here you can see too the ambulance wing on the other side of Fairview just for scale. It's a larger footprint building. A lot of these blocks would be housing at the perimeter, but the internal space would be green courtyards, as Chris mentioned before. And that, hold on, I have to switch power to my iPad. Stick with me for a moment. Right. I just wanted to highlight a comment that was made earlier about alleyways since we're on this drawing.
Right.
You can see here, I'm drawing between First and Wiley Street.
Uh-huh.
The idea that given the layout of those two blocks, we could introduce a secondary alley that would provide parking access to those
Right.
residents, but also provide access to parking, which would be under all of these units here. And I think
That-
you could do that on any number of these streets if, you know, it met the sort of development parameters that they were looking at within that specific block. Let me just clear that. Okay. All right. This is a view. I'll go slow because I know these take a while to get reoriented, but this is a view looking back to where we just were, from the west looking back to the east. So you see the ambulance wing in the foreground and Hunter School, and then the Greenway. The parking garage, we think we can put a single loaded residential on either side so that you don't see the parking garage. It's now lined with residential units. And again, you can see the sort of scale of that development as it relates to the parking garage on the north side. So here's the other interesting thing, is by looking at the scale of this development on the south side of the Greenway being a bit lower,
Uh-huh.
we
Yeah, I
can
like
get more,
that.
we can get more solar access into the Greenway.
Right.
And that the taller buildings are on the north side, because we know winter's in the Midwest.
Right.
And
within each type of building, your taller ones, then within each of those, then will there be like lower income, different income level housing?
all of that's possible. I think within these different typologies, you can see examples of different ways to integrate, to mix 1 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms,
In the right direction.
rate and affordable. There's many different examples.
Okay.
Now I'm going to rotate again. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, actually, we're going to ask a question here. So one of our questions, and when we say density, it also is getting into the height and the scale of the development. But keep in mind, a lot of this, too, when we talk about density, is the residential densities to support the future growth and expanded housing choices for current, but also future residents, future generations, because this will be a over 10-year plan to build out. And maybe while people are voting, if I can just summarize what we saw earlier, is that we really saw a higher density here. So that is one sort of zoning classification. We then saw it sort of stepping down south of the Greenway as it starts to transition to First Street. And then we saw a different scale of development really transitioning to McDowell Gardens. So there was, scale development here, another scale development here, and then this middle, so you have kind of 1, 2, and 3. 2 really became this zone where you transition between the two, and it all comes together around the Greenway.
So just sharing the results of the poll here, we've got about 47% for too great in density and about 41% on just right, with about 13% saying it's coming in at too small. I think some of the other comments that came in through in the chat also is that definitely some concern around the monolithic nature of some of the buildings along Second. So we want to talk a little bit about that, Doug, about how we're going to think about breaking down that in scale. And here's another comment here coming in about more penetration between Second Street facing structures.
So I think that's a great segue to the next set of slides. So while we were out and about, we took some photos because we were really, you look at plans and you forget sort of the reality of the scale that's there and sort of the precedent of the lot here in front of the parking garage, which is in the background, and just sort of seeing the ability to look at higher density at that intersection. And so we started to do some just very early modeling. So I just wanted to show the photo so everyone was familiar with kind of where we were within the site. Because when I take all of that off, as you'll see, it may take a while to adjust. This is that same view. You see the parking garage in the back and the hospital. So that site I just outlined is right here.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Right there. And the potential to build up maybe almost to the height of the parking garage on this prominent corner. So we're looking on Second Street. But the idea to build that up and to keep those same setbacks we were talking about. And I think this comment, again, we're not into architecture yet, but let me just sort of diagram below here on Second Street. We understand the existing city ordinance does require variation every 60 feet or so. So we would work to illustrate what that would look like. And perhaps that's also variations in the building height. You can see too, we're creating setbacks here. Again, that helps with solar access, but also breaks down the scale of buildings. I think what for us was really interesting, if you've walked along Second recently, is the ability to see kind of this great retail, other community uses happening along the ground floor along this street. And maybe the units above are actually set back and you start to have outdoor terraces and things like this.
I'd like that.
With views of the park. And there was the other comment of more porosity and connections from Second Street south. Again, maybe there's ways where you can start to open up passages, within the buildings as ways to connect through, or even, to break and just kind of set them back to allow that connection through. So there's a lot of things we can do. And that's why I think these comments we're getting this evening will really inform how we refine the plan and start to then represent images of what it could be. So you're helping us craft these views almost. Yeah, so Rachel, do you want to snap this before I take a...
Got it. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, thanks. All right. Okay. Yeah, this was the view that was so great when we were out there. I actually ran into one of the members of the Hopewell group who has joined us in many of these meetings. It's amazing how we all got to know each other through Zoom. But this is looking south to the site. Again, here's the computer view looking south. So you can see the hospital in the background, the parking garage on the left. And this idea of bringing Fairview Street through all the way from McDowell Gardens, potentially looking at housing here. Now, granted, you know, we can move these all around, but this would potentially be housing. And then this building here could be the performing arts building. You know, some very cool space, maybe with terraces that's starting to, again, overlook the park. And then potentially more housing in front of the parking garage. Again, one of the questions we'll have to ask, and we'd love your feedback on, is what should happen on the ground floor of these buildings? You know, should this continue to be retail, or this far away from the B line, it'd be better that these are just residential lobbies? Or perhaps we do something special at the corner here, because it's kind of at that major space where a lot of people will be crossing, and it's directly adjacent to the Performing Arts Center. Anyway, lots of potential. Rachel, do you want to take a picture?
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Here's a view over by Croger. Morton Street's right in front, and I'm standing on the B line. Looking west, you can see the parking garage in the background. For some reason, when we took this computer view, we moved over just a little bit, and there is an existing, to make it look worse than it is.
Right.
No, there's an industrial building there that would be removed and redeveloped, but this is where the Greenway would come out, that idea of a plaza on the B line. And what was really interesting, and to take advantage of the topography, this could be a really amazing space. And you see the street right here. And that question of what is the scale, and do we need a street along this Greenway? I think we still have to look at, but in this view, at least, it seems like it could be designed with the park itself, this linear Greenway. And you can see how the buildings all start to step as they move up with the development. So again, this really creates, I think, more diversity and more sense of community, that not everything is the same height, and you take advantage of that topography. But the scale of the Greenway also feels fairly residential, yet open enough that the public would be welcome. Now, this is a view on Rogers Street looking towards the core building and the hospital. So First Street is the cross street in the back. And the reason we took this view is the existing building here that the hospital uses for some office space, I believe, is already 4 stories. Although it's set back, we were wondering if at this corner, because we're across from the park here, you could look at potentially building this edge out. Whoops, excuse me, building this edge out at 3 or 4 stories. And so we took a view. We moved in a little bit so you could actually see the park space outside of the core building. So the entry to the core building, if I got this right, you guys, is like right here. I think it's somewhere right there.
Oh, okay.
And the idea, yeah, you could, you know, again, we're just showing 3 stories at this corner, but I know out south of First Street, we're starting to look at townhomes and single family, but maybe at this corner, because it's on Rogers, which is a more important street, you could look at some additional density or units, but maybe only going up to 3 floors.
Maybe you could have a green roof.
Oh, totally. Hold on.
Definitely.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I think this idea of sort of setbacks and active rooftops where it makes sense would just add more eyes on the street, would make for a more interesting development.
Could be a restaurant up there.
And then I think this is finally the last one.
First Street, yeah.
First Street. So we all know the bridge. There's the bridge today. But if we're able to remove the bridge, restore the core building, build sidewalks on either side, we start to create I think a really great transition to the McDowell Gardens neighborhood, and a really great neighborhood street. So in closing, this was the photo we started at the beginning when the mayor and Mick introduced today's series of work sessions. And we started to just look at how, given our conversations about streets and greenways and allowing a diverse range of housing choices, could start to fill out and complement this part of Bloomington. So again, these are just early models to get feedback. They're not final designs or development proposals, but they do help us understand from all you concerns about density or what you like about open space, activation, and other connections. So maybe the last question for tonight was, how do you feel about the height of the development? I think the caveat here is it's not one size fits all. There is a gradient across the site. And I think any feedback in the chat about where you think it's okay to have some height or where we should step down more would be really helpful, because we can continue to tune this and go back and look at what that may mean related to density, land use, and different development options.
We've got about 10 seconds left on the voting, with 32 of 50, 35 of 55 having voted here.
And, I should have mentioned this earlier, but we've got, 10 to 11 parcels here. They're not all going to be developed at once. Sort of interim uses on a number of the parcels. Sort of, use of buildings that may remain for a little bit. I think this framework works with existing buildings. So if for any reason we need to retain or look at a phased approach to the development of the site, again, I think the city and community have great flexibility in continuing to work with the future development of the site.
I agree.
So I'll stop, Aaron.
Yeah, so stopping sharing results. A lot of comments here on retail, and I think maybe a good conversation piece here to talk about the role of the site as a second kind of hub in downtown. That's something we've talked about in previous sessions, and the idea that this is not intended to compete with downtown, but to provide another avenue for development for the city. And then a related question, the question about where we can place retail on the site, with a lot of concern about vacant retail elsewhere in the city, and how that might be supported. I think there's also a lot of discussion here about high density being needed, high density with community uses at the bases and affordable housing as a priority.
You didn't share your screen, Aaron, but I think
Oh.
we got what you were.
Sorry, I'm trying to read as they come in here. And
Well, we do have 5 minutes. I know we're taking valuable time from everyone's evening. So if, I don't know if there's a summary, maybe Aaron, of some of the key things throughout the evening. And then maybe also Mick or someone on the team wants to talk about our next steps.
yes, so I think for the summary, what we'll do is put together a package that goes out with the presentation that summarizes many of the comments and questions that have come in. So you'll be able to see that afterwards and refer to them and see if you haven't been tracking the chat, you'll see what other folks have come in. I think it's going to be a little too difficult to kind of compile it as we're talking through this session here. But we will certainly have all those materials available on the website along with the recording of the presentation.
And I'll take the handoff if that was meant to be a handoff, Aaron, and just thank everybody. Always a lively conversation with our community, whatever the projects are, that's great. That's why we have these forums so that you can share your ideas. We will gather the feedback from this meeting. Someone had asked earlier where to look for that so they could look at all the ideas that were rapidly coming through the chat. That'll be captured and put on the website, bloomingtonhospitalsite.com. We'll also, as the design team begins to go forward with the ideas from tonight and turn this into a more refined master plan, we'll share those along the way before we do the reveal, November 18th. That'll be the next meeting. We'll publicize that, get it out to everybody ahead of time so you can participate in that as well. And no decisions have been made. I think I saw several times some assumptions about a lot of things in there. And quite frankly, it's just, this is a long master planning process that then turns into a long design process that then has to be vetted with real market developers who will come in and do phases of this project. And I just want to remind everybody, this isn't a 2-year project. This is a multi-year, maybe decades long development project. So when you think about things today, I hope you can also put your future hat on and recognize we're building the Bloomington of tomorrow, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and more from now. We may build a convention center across the street from that. We may not. We don't know what's all going to happen, but this area is going to change. In and of itself, it will, as it's changed in zoning in the future years, as well as other elements that will come up, just like COVID did this year and surprised us all and changed our world. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about what you'd like to see and what you might not like to see, as well as we will, as well as this plan continues to develop. Mayor Hamilton, I'll turn it over to you to close.
Yeah, thank you so much for everybody's time, not only tonight, but going forward. I just want to make a couple points echoing most of what Deputy Mayor Mick said. One, this master plan, which will come out of this process, is a living document. It is a plan which will undoubtedly evolve and change. But I do think it's important for us to think about, does it embody the right values? Is it directionally correct as we're thinking about where the community is headed? It won't be built the way it's planned, no matter what we try to do. But are we putting the framework together correctly, and are we embedding the values that we care most about in this? The steering committee will continue discussing this, as will public input continue. So both through the website that was mentioned, personal contacts, conversations, emails, share it with your friends, encourage them to weigh in on this, and as well know that about 36 people representing the whole community will also be meeting and continuing to refine this in work sessions. This is a multi-year thing, and it is built, the process is going to be built on public investment and private investment. And neither of those should be taken for granted. It can be very substantial public investment that we have to think about, where does that come? It will depend upon very significant private investment. And the combination of those two can steer it in different ways, both in the physical landscape and design, as well as the programmatic, how much affordable housing, how can we activate it in different ways. So as Mick said too, you know, we're a bicentennial city. Let's think about what this should look like 50 years from now. Who is going to be here? Who's going to enjoy it? We build parks to last for decades and a century. We're designing a new place, a new part of Bloomington. What should it be like generations from now? And your input is so helpful. We really appreciate it. And I want to thank the professional team who just wonderfully helped lay out some options for us. So thank you all so much for your time. Please stay tuned, stay connected, give us more feedback. And again, thanks to all who presented tonight. It's really exciting to think about the future for our city. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good job, Aaron, keeping everything running too. Well done. And presenters, that was really, really terrific. Magic drawing and all that stuff, you know, that was good. Rachel, thank you too.
Of course.
Doug, if you're still on, really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, I'm here. I just had to switch off my one computer.
Yeah. You only had one power source. I know we have people coming in and out a little bit, but I just wanted to, I do informally just thank you for that. That's terrific, terrific work in helping people try to imagine options and all. Mick, you good?
Yeah, as I thought, some of the blocked buildings got the same kind of feedback we got when we did the convention center. It's just hard to imagine something that's shaped like a square or rectangle without any breakups. So that's understandable. And I think as we move forward, we'll make that sort of change so that people can get a better idea of it. It is hard to grasp.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good.
Good though. A lot of
Thank you all.
always.
Really, really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Very exciting. Onward we go.
All
Yeah,
right.
have a great
Onward and upward, but I don't, that's not what I mean. Onward we go. No loaded terms. See. Take
Great.
care. Thanks.
Have a
so
great
much.
evening.
See y'all.
Thanks
Thank you.
for the evening.
Bye.